There's a man and two children. I just dropped off the children and he wouldn't let me in the door. There's two little boys in the house and there's an adult man. He has supervised visitation and he blew up the house.
I probably do some pretty, some people might think they're weird.
This isn't another video about Watts Island, but I'm hoping that the inhabitants of Watts Island keep watching, because I don't know if it's just me, but it feels like a lot of people on Watts Island are either new to true crime or unfamiliar with how toxic family systems play out in true crime, or both. From my perspective, when looking at the long-term family dynamics, it was predictable. And I want to illustrate that with the Susan Powell case. A mother goes missing under very suspicious circumstances. Her husband, who is the last person who saw her, gives a cringeworthy TV interview denying any involvement in her disappearance whatsoever. Police botch the investigation. It's revealed that they were having trouble in their marriage and were on the verge of divorce. As law enforcement gets closer to filing formal charges on the husband, and as some of his family members get implicated in the crime, they all react by going on TV to defame the missing woman, accusing her of being mentally unstable, of having an affair, and they accuse the police of victimizing the family. Just as the police close in on the husband, he and his family throw a massive wrench in the entire investigation, making it extremely obvious that he was responsible for his wife's murder, but also rendering it impossible for anyone to ever know the full truth. In the process of doing this, the husband murders the missing woman's 7- and 5-year-old boys. To this very day, despite how blatantly obvious the truth seems to the rest of the world, this missing woman's family continues to insist that she's to blame for everything, and continue to paint the husband as an abused spouse who just followed orders, and the missing woman as an abusive, manipulative tramp. Those of you who are stuck on Watts Island will recognize that the contours of the case I just outlined are extremely similar to the Watts case, but not exactly. It doesn't exactly fit the mold, but it fits the mold enough to be a recognizable pattern that plays out across true crime time and time again. This isn't another video about Watts Island, but I'm hoping that the inhabitants of Watts Island keep watching, because I don't know if it's just me, but it feels like a lot of people on Watts Island are either new to true crime or unfamiliar with how toxic family systems play out in true crime, or both. Because to be honest with you, when I look at the dynamics of Watts Island, I completely understand how Watts did what he did. But I see other people saying, why? From my perspective, when looking at the long-term family dynamics, it was predictable. And I want to illustrate that with the Susan Powell case, because these scenarios are like bad relationship patterns that play out over and over again. You know, you've had those bad relationships that seem to play out over and over again until you figure out how to break that pattern, right? I didn't start out wanting to compare, but as I started to research this case for my Holy Husbands with Pent-Up Rage series, the template presented itself with such undeniable force and clarity that it would have been irresponsible to ignore it. Believe it or not, the Powell case is even more disturbing and involved, so first I'm going to walk you through the key facts of the case so I can get to the reasons I've included it in my Holy Husbands with Pent-Up Rage series, and then I'm going to show why the inhabitants of Watts Island should look at this case and stop reacting to every little bit of stimuli that comes out of Planet Watts. And if you've seen my past videos on Planet Watts, you'll know that I've declared that there's a deep state in Planet Watts, and it comes directly out of the Watts family. Before I go into the facts of the Powell case, here are some important housekeeping notes. First of all, hopefully you'll subscribe if you like this content and hit one of those buttons, the up or down thumb. It doesn't matter. And also, this case involves some extremely disturbing details around stalking and voyeurism and sexual harassment and child pornography and incest and inappropriate sexual situations. So please be aware of that before continuing to watch or watching around young family members or people. Also, this is a very involved case with a lot of family history, and it's been covered in elaborate detail in a fantastic podcast called Cold, which is now fully owned by Amazon Prime. Oxygen also did a 2-part series on this case that's really good. And also Stephanie Harlowe did a 3-part series, and she always does a great job going in depth. So if this case interests you at all, I encourage you to check out all of those sources, and I'll link to them below. So here are the key facts of the case, and as I go through it, I hope you Watts Islanders are paying attention to the similarities. I hope you're watching it all. On December 7th, 2009, in Salt Lake City, Utah, 27-year-old Susan Powell didn't show up for work, and she didn't call in sick, and this was very unlike her. When her supervisor couldn't reach her, she tried to reach Susan's husband, Josh, but couldn't reach him all day either, which was unusual. He was nowhere to be found all day long, but at the end of the day, he showed up at Susan's office to pick her up, as if everything was normal. But it wasn't. It was far normal. By that day, Susan and Josh had been married nearly 9 years, and they had 2 young boys. Charlie was 5 and Braden was 3. And by the time she went missing, Susan had privately documented this slow, tortuous decline of her marriage, heavily aided by her in-laws, with particular emphasis on her father-in-law, Stephen Powell. Within a year of going missing, Susan had painstakingly documented all of her joint assets in anticipation of divorce or demise. There's not a question whatsoever that Susan saw her fate coming, and unequivocally told several people, even recording her fears in a last will and testament, as suggested by a lawyer or a friend. When police questioned Josh Powell, it was as if he knew exactly what to say and what to not say, so he could evade detection. We've since learned that Josh's brother Michael, who was an intelligence officer in the Navy, probably coached him on how to do his interviews. The police also interviewed Charlie and Braden quick after the disappearance, and Charlie said that his mom stayed where the crystals are. So that was all the police could go on to start looking for Susan, but they didn't feel they could file charges on Josh yet. Within a month, Josh escaped with his boys from Utah to Washington and moved in with his father, Stephen. Since Josh evaded police and his family protected him, the police were forced to flush him out via press by making their searches very public. Josh and his family fought back by launching a smear campaign against Susan Powell, accusing her of being unstable and flirtatious and leaving town with another missing Mormon guy. The smear campaign backfired on the Powell family because it gave law enforcement an excuse to execute a search warrant on Stephen Powell, and they found him in possession of not only child pornography, but evidence of Stephen's long and disgusting history of infatuation with Susan Powell. These events resulted in Josh's children being taken away from him and in being ordered to get a psychosexual evaluation, which would include a lie detector test. This was apparently a bridge too far for Josh Powell, because not long after being ordered into the evaluation, he slammed the door of his rental house in the face of a social worker, told his son that he had a surprise for him, and then blew up his house with himself and Charlie and Braden in it.
There was a man and 2 children. I just dropped off the children, and he wouldn't let me in the door. There's 2 little boys in the house, and there's an adult man. He has supervised visitation, and he blew up the house and the kids. And you think he might have done this intentionally? Yes.
Hello, this is Josh. I'm calling to say goodbye. I am not able to live without my sons, and I'm not able to go on anymore. I'm sorry to everyone I've hurt.
I'm afraid of seeing something. I don't want to see it. He just opened the door. The kids were one step ahead of me. They're 5 and 7. They were one step ahead of me, and he slammed the door in my face.
Not long after that, Stephen Powell was sentenced to 5 years in prison for voyeurism and child pornography. While he was in prison, Michael Powell, Josh's younger brother, committed suicide by jumping off the roof of his building in Minneapolis, where he was studying for his PhD. It's widely believed that he was involved in covering up Susan's disappearance, and there is evidence to show that. Stephen Powell served 3 years and got out of jail in 2017 when he died of a heart attack before police could question him about the whereabouts of Susan's body. So to this day, we still don't know where Susan's body is, and we'll probably never will. All because of the selfishness and cruelty of her sick husband and his delusional family. Believe me, I totally skimmed the surface of that story. And in this video, I won't be able to cover the many layers of this heartbreaking tale. But with that first part, I wanted to give you the main outline of the who, what, where, and when. But now I want to spend a bit more time on the why. Why did Susan Powell go missing on December 7th, 2009? We have to start the answer with Stephen Powell, our holy husband with pent-up rage. When Stephen and Terry Powell married each other in Puyallup, Washington in 1972, they were both devout members of the LDS Church, and they intended to raise their family that way. But by the time their 5 children reached the age to be baptized, Stephen had started to actively hate everything about the Mormon Church without telling his wife. By the time they decided to get the divorce, when Josh was 15 and an active Mormon, Stephen was so vividly against Mormonism that he poisoned his children against it and mocked and teased them when they went to church with their mother. However, he conveniently cherry-picked aspects of the LDS Church or the doctrine that fit his agenda. Most importantly, the idea that women fit primarily one role in life, and that was to be sexual animals under the complete control to fit the whims of all men's desires. Stephen taught his children, and especially his boys, a wicked cocktail of values that would set every single one of his boys up for failure and leave them either institutionalized or dead by the time they were adults. So what do I mean by this? Well, he actively talked down to his wife and daughters. He watched porn in front of his children in the house. He allowed them to walk around naked well past the age that it's appropriate. And he didn't teach them any boundaries or appropriate behavior. It was as if everything they did was okay. Sound familiar? In addition, his boys were taught that not only were men meant to find a woman to marry and control for the rest of their lives, but also that women they marry and control were responsible for all of their own feelings and behavior. For instance, Stephen was an extremely controlling husband, shoving his camera in people's faces and telling them how to smile and pose and behave at all times. But when they didn't do what he said, he blamed them for his resulting anger. As I said before, the divorce between Terry and Stephen was extremely ugly. What Terry found out was that Stephen had a long-term obsession with someone in their ward, with a woman in their ward. And what he said in one of his journals was that he would be okay if this woman's husband died so that he could take this woman on as a plural wife. And he even asked his wife Terry if she'd be okay, with allowing him to take on a plural marriage system. Of course, she was not okay with it. So the divorce between Terry and Stephen was extremely ugly. And at the time, the children were given the choice of which parent they wanted to live with, When Josh was told by his mother that if he wanted to live with her, he needed to follow certain rules, such as not cussing or keeping a curfew or not watching R-rated movies, he wasn't able to stick with her rules, so he moved in with his father. By the time Josh met Susan and married her, he went through a significant period of awkward incelishness. By that I mean he felt like one of those guys that was angrily going through life thinking that he should get any girl he wanted, but they were all jerks. Indeed, he was just like his father. Josh had a very, very high opinion of himself, and it's unclear how it came about. He hadn't achieved anything of greatness. In fact, he quit before he could complete most academic programs. When he did complete academic programs, he didn't achieve any major accomplishments. He wasn't able to hold down a job. His small businesses never made any money. He forced Susan to be the sole breadwinner. And most people who met him found him to be insufferably self-centered and boring. For Susan's part, she thought she was falling in love with a devout Mormon because she was too, but just like his father, Josh had an on-again, off-again relationship with the LDS Church, and not long after they got married in the temple, Josh flipped a switch and lost interest in attending services with Susan and turned into a controlling husband who was not very interested in being intimate with her. Not long after they got married, Josh and Susan got evicted from their apartment and had to move into Stephen's house, where Josh's brothers, John and Michael, already lived. It wasn't a real big house, so Josh and Susan had to sleep in the dining room with only a makeshift wall created by a blanket separating the dining room and living room. Obviously, the newlyweds had no privacy. Now, for a normal family in a temporary situation, this may be okay, but the Powells were not just an ordinary family. I mean, they already didn't understand boundaries. So think about what I just told you about the conditions that Josh and his siblings were subjected to by his father as they were growing up. And now consider the following. By the time Josh and Susan moved into Stephen's house, John, one of the brothers, had been diagnosed with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and was known to walk around the house naked. And at one point during their investigation after Susan went missing, Josh's brother John answered the door wearing only a diaper when police knocked on the door. Back when Josh and Susan were living with Stephen, developed an obsession with Susan. It was such a deep obsession that he started to secretly stalk her with his camcorder and steal her personal items. He stole her bras, her underwear, and her socks. He even took her used hygiene products out of the bathroom trash, her cotton balls, her Q-tips, and yes, even her used tampons. This man would take these used items, bag them in plastic baggies, label them, and date them, and then store them for safekeeping, and do other things on camera. With her bras, underwears, and clothing, he would arrange them on pillows as if they were on her person, and then make videos pleasuring himself while touching them and talking about what he would do to her.
I probably do some pretty, some people might think they're weird.
Here are the panties that I picked up out of Susan's laundry. God, they smell so nice.
I think she's the most beautiful thing that ever walked the earth. I gotta show how happy I am.
God, I worship her. She just turns me on. I'm in a perpetual state of turn on when she's around. I had to get a picture of this dress. She was so beautiful. Back here, there is a jacuzzi. I'd love to spend the evening in here with Susan is what I'd like to do.
After a while, Josh found a job at Home Depot and Susan found a job at a bank, so they were able to move out. But the distance didn't change Stephen's feelings for Susan. In fact, they made his feelings even stronger. Obsessing about her and stalking her was such a priority that he wrote in his own journals that he missed work appointments and paying bills because of it. He even wrote songs about her with full arrangements and bought expensive recording studio setup so he could convince her to sing backup on the recordings. I will now sing a couple of lines from one of the songs to illustrate their corny ridiculousness and also to avoid a copyright strike from Stephen because he fancied himself a recording artist. So here we go. I will love you in a special way. I will love you every single day. Yeah, that's how it went. One of his incredible compositions. Stephen thought this music was so awesome that he created a stage name and tried to sell his music on a label. It was called Stephen Chandry. One day after Josh lost his job at Home Depot, Stephen gave Susan a ride home from dropping Josh off at a new trucking job. He had Susan trapped in his car for an hour on that drive home, so he decided it was a good time for him to confess his undying love to her. Thinking he sincerely thought that Susan was interested in him as well. Since he journaled everything, he discreetly journaled this moment as well, probably thinking that it was going to go his way.
It'd be great to go to Colorado and see a different part of the U.S., you know?
Yeah. I'm probably wrong, but I've really fallen in love with you. Maybe I'm interpreting something that I shouldn't be interpreting. You know, it just, for example, when we were sitting on the couch, it just felt like you were very, you know, I mean, I was extremely aroused, and I think you were somewhat aroused, at least I thought.
I don't know where you're going with this.
Susan, yeah, well, I'll tell you what
I'm married to your son, and I should just be the daughter-in-law.
I know.
Which puts me a step beneath your own children.
Okay.
And that's where I'm comfortable. I was kind of meaning to talk to you about this. My own father doesn't kiss me, and you kiss me, and I didn't like that.
As far as we know, Josh Powell was well aware of Stephen Powell's feelings and did little to dissuade his father from doing anything about it. We also know that Alina, Josh's youngest sister, led Stephen to believe that Susan was egging Stephen on, victimizing him, that she was flirtatious, that she was also telling Stephen, Alina was also telling Stephen that Susan was a player and was going to break his heart. That's how normalized incestuous relationships and soft boundaries were in the Powell family. So let's step back now and think about how this holy husband with pent-up rage was. And by that I mean Stephen Powell. Because by his actions, let's think about the kind of person he had become and the kind of family he's leading. He's the kind of person who thinks all human beings are tools to be used and thrown away. He's the kind of person who thinks all women are subhuman species to men and are therefore to just be controlled by men, and their only values for the sexual satisfaction of the male species. And finally, he's the kind of person who puts no boundaries on his own behavior and doesn't believe that the law applies to him. Amazingly enough, you could say every single one of those things that I just said about his son, Josh Powell. Do you see a pattern? By the time Susan went missing, Josh had lost control of his wife. But he hated her at the same time. He knew that she was planning to leave him, but he treated her like crap. He did everything in his power to control her, and she did everything in her power to maintain her sanity. Be a good mother and wife, follower of her faith, while also being true to her own self. The thing that ultimately drove Josh to kill himself and his children was the threat of being exposed in a psychosexual evaluation. He couldn't stand to be exposed like that and embarrassed and seen for the true person that he was. Before slamming the door of his rental house in the face of the social worker, he was so selfish and self-centered that he didn't even have the decency or compassion to tell Susan's remaining family where they could find her body. This gave his toxic surviving family members the license to continue blaming Susan for everything. And they did, and they still do, to this day. If the Powell case had happened in 2018, like the Watts case did, we'd have a full-fledged Powell Island. We'd have a team of trolls triggering all kinds of drama and all kinds of YouTubers running around trying to clear Steve and Josh Powell's names and calling Susan a tramp. And that's why I'm here to say that Watts Island is not a new phenomenon. And to me, Chris Watts is not a shocking thing. Chris Watts is a product of a long line of transgenerational trauma. Those murders had nothing to do with Shanann. Shanann was, yes, a strong-willed, somewhat bossy woman. But I was a freaking lunatic, you guys. I screamed and I yelled and I slammed doors. I called names and I did far more than Shanann probably ever did. And I defy you to tell me that I deserve to be murdered. I left my husband before he could murder me. So stop with all this, oh my God, how did Chris Watts do what he did? BS. The only reason this seems like such a big deal is because social media has made it a big deal. The algorithms have made it a big deal. And I'm sorry if this sounds condescending, but it's true. Go watch The Social Dilemma. If you haven't seen it yet, it'll make more sense to you. And I'm not saying that because I'm in it for 2 seconds. I'm saying that because I spent 3 years worth of blood, sweat, and tears working behind the scenes to pull the PR strategy together for the nonprofit behind that movie. And I'm very proud of what we did. It's important. And it will explain why there's a thing called Watts Island. You take the social media algorithms and you combine it with the outrage of a toxic family, and you get Watts Island, or as I call it, Planet Watts. The next planet on the social system is Planet Miliete, because some new disturbing details have come out about missing Maya Miliete from Chula Vista, and I believe that Larry Miliete is our next holy husband with Pent-Up Rage. There's also Valo Daybell. I just did a video on that as well. So thank you very much for watching, and just understand this has nothing to do with Shanann or the victims. Thank you.